For over 20 years, One Piece fans thought they knew Brook, the funny skeleton who asks women to show him their panties, who plays guitar, and who's terrified of ghosts even though he is one. But Oda has been hiding a secret about him for 2 decades, and only now, in the Elbaf arc, did he finally decide to tell it, because the Brook we know today is a drastically weaker version of the Brook he used to be. And this isn't a weakness of personality or courage. It's a literal physical weakness created by the very fruit that was supposed to bring him back to life. The Yomi Yomi no Mi promised resurrection, but did it actually deliver on that promise completely? Or has Brook, this whole time, only been living half of a second chance? Because if the answer is no, then the awakening of this fruit isn't just going to be a power upgrade. It's going to be, quite literally, the continuation of a resurrection that's been left half-finished for over 50 years. And what this means for Brook's future, for his reunion with Laboon, and even for the ultimate fate of every devil fruit in One Piece, is more unsettling than it seems. Stay with me until the end, because this theory connects Soul Kingdom, Thriller Bark, Whole Cake Island, and Egghead into a single thread, and the ending of it might be one of the most emotional moments in the entire final saga of One Piece. Ever since Thriller Bark, in chapter 486, we already knew part of Brook's story. The Rumbar Pirates, the promise made to Laboon at the entrance of the Grand Line, the tragedy in the Florian Triangle, where the entire crew died and Brook was left alone for decades. That part of the story was already settled. It already made us cry. It already felt complete. What nobody knew was what came before all of that. Who Brook was before he became a pirate. And it wasn't until now, starting at chapter 1183 in the Elbaf arc, that Oda finally decided to fill in that gap. We learned that Brook was born and raised in the Soul Kingdom, a land of musicians and instrument makers in the West Blue, ruled by King Soul and Queen Kale, and the Brook we meet there is, honestly, unrecognizable. He wasn't a clumsy musician cracking jokes. He was an elite swordsman, the leader of the entire kingdom's battle squad, a level of skill that today would put him among the most feared swordsmen in the world. In chapter 1183, when members of the Mescaina family invaded the Soul Kingdom to capture Queen Kale, Brook had already cut down every single invader at the harbor hours before they even noticed. The men kept walking, kept moving normally, and only collapsed, bleeding, once they reached the Opera House, far from the actual attack site. The cut was so precise and so fast that the victims' bodies took time to register that they'd been hit at all. This technique has a name, Evening Shower, 3000 Worlds. And the most shocking detail is that this technique never disappeared. We've seen Brook use a version of it at Thriller Bark, on Fishman Island, even at Egghead. But never, not once, at the same devastating level he had when he was still human, and this is where things start getting strange. So why did Brook get weaker with the sword after resurrecting? The answer has been hidden since chapter 643, during the battle on Fishman Island, when Brook himself explains, for the first time, the true nature of the Yomi Yomi no Mi. He says that while normal living beings draw their strength from flesh, blood, and organs, he draws his strength exclusively from his soul because he no longer has any of that. Brook's body today is, quite literally, a skeleton. No muscles, no tendons, none of the physical structure an elite swordsman needs to transfer maximum power into every strike. His soul is strong enough to keep him alive, strong enough to channel the cold of the underworld through his blade. But it isn't strong enough to fully replicate what an entire human body used to be capable of, and this exact detail connects to the single most important explanation in this entire theory: how a devil fruit awakening actually works. In chapter 785, Doflamingo explains that an awakening happens when a paramecia's power starts affecting things beyond the user's own body. He demonstrates this by turning the ground and surrounding buildings into controllable strings. And the pattern repeats with other cases. Katakuri can turn the ground itself into mochi. Kid can designate other people and objects as magnetic poles, projecting magnetism outside his own body. Law, with his room, can manipulate anything within an area, not just his own body. The pattern is clear. Every paramecia awakening expands the fruit's original effect beyond the user, out into the surrounding world. So what is the original effect of the Yomi Yomi no Mi? The name itself already gives away the answer. Yomi comes from yomigeru, which in Japanese means to be reborn, to be resurrected. And that same word, written with a different set of kanji, refers directly to Yomi no Kuni, the underworld of Japanese mythology, the land of the dead. The fruit's full name literally means to return from the underworld, and here's where everything lines up in a way few fans ever noticed, a clue Oda may have planted over 20 years ago, without anyone realizing the scale of it. The fruit promised resurrection to Brook, and technically it delivered. He died, and his soul returned to the world of the living. Up to that point, the power worked exactly as it should, except Brook's soul spent an entire year wandering the Florian Triangle before it was able to find his own body. And by the time it finally got there, the body had already fully decomposed. All that was left was the skeleton. So yes, Brook was resurrected, but his resurrection was left incomplete, and this, I believe, is exactly where the awakening comes in. The word resurrection, in its most literal sense, comes from the Latin resurgere, to rise again, and the concept always carries with it the idea of restoration, returning to one's original form, not to a fragmented version of it. Brook never returned to his original form. His body was never restored. The fruit brought his soul back, but it never finished the job. Here's my theory: the awakening of the Yomi Yomi no Mi will complete that resurrection. It will give Brook the ability to restore his own body, recovering the human form he had while he was still alive, and there's a piece of evidence planted years ago that supports exactly this idea: the name of Brook's sword after the time skip. He named his blade Soul Solid. He himself explains that the name comes from his ability to coat the blade with the energy of his own soul, bringing the cold of the underworld into the world of the living. But think about that for a second. Soul Solid. A soul that becomes solid. If Brook's soul is what keeps him alive, and if that same soul already produces an energy that's almost physical, as he himself describes in chapter 643, then the awakening could be exactly that. His soul solidifying to the point of regenerating his entire body, turning that near-physical energy into something fully physical, fully real. He wouldn't be creating a new body. He'd be completing the resurrection the fruit started decades ago. And here's a detail few fans connect: the power gap between young Brook and current Brook isn't about a lost technique. The technique is still completely intact. What's missing is the body capable of sustaining it, and who taught Brook that technique in the first place? In chapter 1185, we learn that it was Queen Kale herself who trained him in swordsmanship. She found an orphan boy living in a scrapyard and turned him into the leader of the kingdom's entire battle squad. She didn't just teach him swordsmanship, she taught him etiquette, posture, the gentlemanly behavior Brook still carries to this day, even as a pirate. In other words, the foundation of Brook's skill is real, trained, human. It's not a power from the fruit. And when he had a body capable of sustaining that skill, the results were devastating. Evening shower at the level he used it in the Soul Kingdom. Cuts so fast they wounded before they were even noticed. And there's another hidden piece of proof in this: Thriller Bark. When Gecko Moria put Brook's shadow inside Ryuma's body, that exact same swordsmanship style became absurdly more devastating. Ryuma had a real body. Even as a zombie, he still wasn't just bones. And Brook's strikes, executed through that body, were visibly stronger than anything Brook himself can do today. This is basically the definitive proof Brook's combat style is already operating at its highest possible level. What's been missing this whole time is the body, and even without that body, even operating at a fraction of his real potential, Brook still managed to cut one of the Gorosei, one of the 5 elders, in his transformed state during the Egghead arc. In chapter 1113, imagine what he could do with his body restored and his soul fully awakened. But the theory doesn't stop at the physical body. The Yomi Yomi no Mi is classified as a body alteration paramecia, so it makes sense that the awakening would intensify exactly that effect to its limit. But there's another, deeper layer worth considering. In chapter 848, on Whole Cake Island, we saw Brook fighting the homies, animated objects made from fragments of souls collected by Big Mom's Soru no Mai. Brook was able to overpower and dominate those homies because his soul, being a complete real soul, was naturally stronger than soul fragments. That's already Brook affecting souls beyond his own on a smaller scale, but still affecting them. With a full awakening, that ability could expand. He might be able to influence the souls of people who just died, perhaps anchoring them temporarily in the world of the living, the same way his fruit anchors his own soul. This wouldn't be necromancy in the classic sense. It would be an elegant, coherent extension of the fruit's core theme, resurrection. Picture a final battle in the climax of the series, with Brook surrounded by fallen allies and his soul expanding just enough to keep those souls from crossing into the underworld for a few precious moments. Not permanently, but long enough to turn the tide of a decisive fight, and this connects to something Oda has been building for over 20 years. Brook has always been the character tied to the border between life and death. He walked through the underworld. He brings the cold of it into the world of the living through his own sword. He can separate his soul from his body and move like a ghost. His stage name is literally Soul King. All of this points to a character getting closer and closer to crossing the line between both worlds. And the awakening would be the final step of that journey. And here's where this theory gets unsettling. There's a real possibility that, by the end of One Piece, devil fruits will stop existing altogether, that the fruits will return to their natural cycle, releasing the souls trapped inside them, as Vegapunk himself suggested when explaining that fruits are born from people's wishes. If that happens, every devil fruit user would lose their powers. For Luffy, for Chopper, for Robin, that would be inconvenient, but they'd keep living normal lives. For Brook, it would be a death sentence. If his fruits simply stopped working, his soul would lose the anchor keeping it in the world of the living, unless the awakening happens first. If Brook awakens the Yomi Yomi no Mi and recovers his complete human body, he would no longer need the fruit to stay alive. The resurrection would finally be complete. He'd become human again, living his second life for real with flesh, blood, and bone, no longer dependent on an unstable spiritual anchor. And there's a perfect moment, dramatically perfect, for this to happen: the reunion with Laboon. Brook's promise was always to come back, and this entire time, he's only ever been able to imagine that return as a skeleton, because that's exactly what he is right now. But imagine the emotional weight of him showing up in front of Laboon with his body restored, truly alive for the first time in over 50 years. The fruit that promised resurrection would finally deliver on that promise in full, and that's exactly the kind of payoff Oda loves to build. Slow, quiet, planted over 20 years ago, waiting for the right moment to bloom. Everything we saw in the Soul Kingdom, how powerful Brook used to be, how much he lost, how much that body is missed in the middle of a fight, isn't just nostalgia. It's the seed being planted, chapter by chapter, for the final emotional payoff of his entire story. As always, there's still the possibility that the Yomi Yomi no Mi hides mysteries that go beyond all of this, that it was never really just the resurrection fruit, but something far older, far more legendary, connected to things we can't even imagine yet. If this theory is right, the ending of Brook's journey could be one of the most beautiful, most emotional moments in the entire conclusion of One Piece, not because of the power he gains, but because of the life he finally gets back. But what do you think? Did Oda really plan all of this since Thriller Bark? Or will Brook's awakening go in a completely different direction? Let me know your theory in the comments.